What if the person you dismissed without a second glance held more wisdom, more skill, and more grace than you could ever imagine? Margaret Chen moved through the executive floor of Sterling Industries with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned long ago that silence was safer than speaking. At 67, her hands bore the marks of decades spent cleaning other people's spaces, her back slightly curved from years of bending, reaching, scrubbing. But her eyes held something else entirely. Something sharp and calculating that flickered behind her wire-rimmed glasses whenever she paused near the chess sets in the executive lounge. She'd dust around the carved pieces carefully, her fingers hovering over the knights and queens as if greeting old friends. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever noticed Margaret. Until the day Richard Ashford decided she'd make the perfect target for his arrogance, and everything changed. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Margaret had worked at Sterling Industries for 3 years, arriving each evening at 6 when the executives finally left their glass offices. She preferred the night shift. Fewer people meant fewer eyes judging the gray in her hair, the worn shoes she couldn't afford to replace, the accent that marked her as someone who'd arrived in America with nothing but hope and determination. She'd raised 2 children alone after her husband passed, put both through college by cleaning offices just like this one. They had good lives now, a doctor and a teacher, and Margaret was proud, even if she never told them how much her knees ached by the end of each shift. Richard Ashford was everything Margaret wasn't. At 42, he'd inherited his father's company and his father's ego. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a kind of confidence that came from never being told no, Richard treated Sterling Industries like his personal kingdom. He worked late most nights, not because he needed to, but because he enjoyed the image of himself as a tireless leader. His office showcased his achievements: degrees from prestigious universities, photos with politicians and celebrities, and a tournament chess set that he claimed made him an amateur grandmaster. The chess club met in the lounge every Thursday evening. A handful of executives would gather, playing casual games while discussing stock portfolios and golf handicaps. Richard dominated these sessions, rarely losing, always making sure everyone knew when he won. "Chess is a game of superior intellect," he'd often say, gesturing with his scotch glass. "It separates the leaders from the followers." Margaret cleaned around them on Thursdays, emptying trash bins and wiping down tables while they played. She moved like a ghost, trained to be invisible. But she watched. She couldn't help it. Chess had been her first love, discovered in a park in her hometown of Guangzhou when she was 7 years old. Her father, a mathematics professor, had taught her the game, and she'd taken to it with a passion that consumed her childhood. By 16, she'd been ranked among the top junior players in China. By 22, she'd earned her international Grandmaster title, one of only a handful of women at the time to achieve it. Then life happened. Marriage, immigration, motherhood, widowhood. The chessboards became memories tucked away like old photographs. There was no time for tournaments when you were working 3 jobs to feed your children. No energy for the game you loved when exhaustion pulled you into dreamless sleep each night. But the love never died. It just waited, patient as a queen guarding her king. On this particular Thursday, Richard was playing against Tom Webster, the CFO, and winning easily. Margaret dusted nearby, unable to resist observing the position on the board. Richard had Tom's queen trapped, but he was showboating, taking his time, explaining each move with theatrical flair. "You see, Tom, chess is about thinking 10 moves ahead. Some people have that ability." He paused, noticing Margaret standing there with her cleaning cloth. "And some people are meant to clean up after those who do." Tom laughed uncomfortably. Margaret said nothing, but her gaze lingered on the board for just a moment too long. Richard caught it. His eyes narrowed with that particular cruelty that comes from boredom mixed with opportunity. "What is it?" he asked, his voice sharp. "You understand chess, do you? Let me guess, you played checkers back in China." Margaret's grip tightened on her dust cloth. She knew this moment. She'd lived variations of it her entire life in America. The smart thing was to bow her head, mumble an apology, move along. But something in Richard's smirk, the absolute certainty that she was beneath him, made her pause. Before she could think better of it, She spoke quietly. You're about to lose your queen in 3 moves. The lounge went silent. Tom's glass stopped halfway to his lips. Richard's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then hardened into something darker. Excuse me. Margaret immediately regretted speaking. Her heart hammered against her ribs. I apologize. I shouldn't have said anything. She started to turn away, but Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. No, no. Please. Enlighten us. His voice dripped with condescension. Show me how I'm about to lose my queen. This should be entertaining. He gestured toward the board with mock gallantry. After all, I wouldn't want to ignore advice from someone so clearly qualified to teach me strategy. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Richard, come on. I'm serious. Richard crossed his arms. If she's so confident, let her explain. Or better yet. His eyes lit up with malicious inspiration. Let's play a game. You and me. Right now. Margaret felt her chest tighten. This was dangerous territory. Humiliating a man like Richard, even unintentionally, would cost her this job. She needed this job. The rent was due next week, and her daughter's baby was coming soon. She wanted to help with expenses. Mr. Ashford, I'm working. I should. One game, Richard interrupted. If I win, you admit you were talking nonsense and apologize to everyone here for wasting our time. If you win, which you won't, I don't know, give you a week's paid vacation. He smiled, confident and cruel. Unless you're afraid? The others watched, uncomfortable but silent. Margaret looked at Richard's face, at the absolute certainty written there that he would crush her, that this would be his evening's entertainment at her expense. She thought of her father, dead 20 years now, who'd taught her that chess was more than a game, it was dignity, discipline, the assertion that your mind had value. She thought of herself at 16, fearless and brilliant, before life taught her to make herself small. One game, she said quietly, setting down her cleaning supplies. Richard's smile widened. He reset the board with theatrical flair, waving her to the seat Tom had vacated. Margaret sat slowly, her worn uniform suddenly feeling even more conspicuous against the leather chair. Her hands, calloused and marked with cleaning chemicals, hovered over the pieces. It had been so long. Would she remember? Would her mind still move the way it once had? Richard played white and opened aggressively, his moves fast and flashy. Margaret responded carefully, feeling the old patterns awakening in her mind like muscle memory. The lounge grew quiet except for the click of pieces on wood. Other executives drifted in, drawn by the unusual sight. Someone whispered, "Richard's playing the cleaning lady?" The game unfolded. Richard's confidence began to waver around move 15, when he realized Margaret wasn't just competent, she was methodical, precise, seeing lines he'd missed. By move 20, his forehead showed the first sheen of sweat. Margaret's expression remained calm, almost serene. This was the language she'd been fluent in once, and her mind still spoke it perfectly. She sacrificed a bishop in a combination Richard didn't see coming, and suddenly his position crumbled like a house of cards. When she delivered checkmate on move 28, the silence in the room was absolute. Richard stared at the board, his face white, then flushed red. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Margaret sat very still, already regretting what she'd done, already calculating whether she'd just destroyed the only income she had. You got lucky, Richard finally managed, his voice strangled. Perhaps, Margaret said softly, standing. May I return to my work now? But Richard wasn't done. His humiliation demanded satisfaction. Another game. Best 2 out of 3. Margaret's stomach tightened. She needed to defuse this, to escape before Richard's wounded pride turned into something worse. Mr. Ashford, I really should finish my work. Afraid you can't do it twice? Richard's voice rose, attracting even more attention. A small crowd had gathered now, junior executives and late working staff drawn by the commotion. You embarrassed me in front of my colleagues with some lucky moves. The least you can do is prove it wasn't a fluke. Tom Webster finally found his voice. Richard, this isn't. Stay out of this, Tom. Richard's jaw was set, his eyes hard. He'd built his identity on being the smartest person in every room, and this elderly cleaning woman had shattered that illusion in 28 moves. 2 more games. If I win both, you're fired. If you win, he paused, searching for something that would make this seem fair, I'll personally ensure you get a promotion to day shift supervisor. The cruelty of it struck Margaret like a physical blow. Her job, her survival, wagered on a chess game to soothe a rich man's ego. She wanted to refuse, to walk away with whatever dignity she could salvage. But the word fired echoed in her mind. She was 67. Who would hire her if she lost this position? How would she pay rent? Help her daughter? That's not fair, someone said from the crowd. Margaret turned, surprised to see Sarah Kim, a young executive she'd exchanged greetings with occasionally. She's working. This isn't right. Nobody asked you, Sarah, Richard snapped. But others were murmuring now, uncomfortable with the spectacle, with the power imbalance on display. Richard felt control slipping and doubled down. Unless she's admitting she can't back up her claims? Margaret looked at the faces around her, some sympathetic, some curious, some hungry for drama. She felt every one of her 67 years, felt the weight of every sacrifice she'd made, every time she'd bitten her tongue and bowed her head to keep a job she needed. Her father's voice echoed in memory. In chess, you show who you are. You cannot hide behind lies or luck. Only skill and honor matter. I'll play, she said quietly. Then, with more strength, but 3 games total. Best of 3. And if I win the match, you donate $10,000 to the chess in school's program downtown. Those children deserve better equipment. Richard blinked, not expecting the counteroffer, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now. Fine. Whatever. He waved dismissively. This is all academic anyway. You won't win again. But she did. The second game was even more decisive than the first. Margaret played with a calm certainty that came from decades of experience Richard couldn't imagine. She'd faced Soviet grandmasters in Moscow, Cuban masters in Havana, German champions in Berlin, all when the chess world barely acknowledged women could play at that level. Richard's aggressive style, meant to intimidate casual players, was child's play to someone who'd navigated tournaments where every opponent wanted to prove a woman didn't belong. Checkmate came on move 24. Richard's hands trembled as he knocked over his king. The crowd was no longer murmuring, they were silent, watching something unfold that felt larger than a chess game. Have you ever faced someone who underestimated you completely? Share your story in the comments below. Sarah Kim approached the table as Richard stared at the board in disbelief. What's your name? She asked Margaret gently. Your full name. Margaret Chen, she answered, confused by the question. Sarah's eyes widened. She pulled out her phone, typed rapidly, then turned the screen toward Richard. Is this you? Margaret glanced at the screen and felt her breath catch. It was an old article from a chess journal, dated 1982. The headline read, Chen Mei-ling becomes youngest female international grandmaster in Chinese history. There was a photo of her at 22, holding a trophy, her eyes bright with accomplishment. Margaret Chen had been her married name. Chen Mei-ling had been her identity before life reshaped her. Richard's face went from red to pale as he stared at the article. Around them, executives crowded closer, reading over his shoulder. International Grandmaster? Tom Webster breathed. You played professional chess? Margaret felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with shame, and everything to do with a part of herself she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed. A long time ago, she said softly. A different life. Sarah kept scrolling. You played in the World Chess Championship qualifying rounds. You beat Anatoly Volkov, he went on to become world champion. She looked up at Margaret with something like awe. Why are you working as a cleaning lady? The question hung in the air. Margaret wanted to explain about immigration, about starting over with nothing, about choosing her children's futures over her own past. But the words felt too big, too complicated. "Life happened," she finally said. "We all make choices." Richard stood abruptly, his chair clattering backward. For a moment, Margaret braced herself for an explosion, for the fury of a man whose ego had been completely demolished. But what she saw in his face was more complex. Humiliation, yes, but also something that might have been shame. He was surrounded by his employees, all witnessing his arrogance come crashing down. All watching him lose to someone he'd dismissed as beneath him. "I need..." His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "I need some air." He walked toward the elevator, his shoulders rigid with the effort of maintaining composure. The crowd began dispersing, people murmuring, several approaching Margaret with kind words and questions she wasn't ready to answer. Sarah Kim stayed, though, her young face earnest. "Ms. Chen, I'm head of our corporate social responsibility program. You mentioned chess in schools. Would you be willing to talk about maybe visiting them? Teaching some classes?" Margaret felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. "I'm just a cleaning lady," she whispered. "No," Sarah said firmly. "You're an international grandmaster who also happens to clean offices. There's a difference." She paused. "And honestly, that makes you more remarkable, not less. You kept going. You did what you had to do." Over the next hour, Margaret finished her shift in a daze. People she'd cleaned around for 3 years suddenly saw her, really saw her. Some apologized for never acknowledging her before. Others asked about chess, about her life, about how she'd ended up here. Tom Webster found her before she left, looking uncomfortable. "Richard went home. He asked me to tell you." He paused. "He'll write the check. 10,000 for the chess program. And he wanted me to say he's sorry, though I don't know if he'll manage to say it to your face." Margaret nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She gathered her cleaning supplies, changed out of her uniform, and left Sterling Industries as the sun began to rise. But as she walked to the bus stop, her phone buzzed. It was an email, from Sarah Kim, sent to her personal address that must have been in the HR files. "Ms. Chen, I spoke with our CEO and board chair, Richard's father, actually, the real boss. They'd like to meet with you Monday morning. There might be an opportunity here, if you're interested. You showed us all something important tonight. Thank you for that." If you've been moved by Margaret's story, please subscribe for more heartwarming tales like this one. The journey isn't quite over yet. Monday morning felt surreal. Margaret arrived at Sterling Industries at 9 a.m., the first time she'd ever seen the building in daylight. Sarah Kim met her in the lobby, dressed professionally but wearing a warm smile. "Ready?" she asked. "I don't know what I'm ready for," Margaret admitted. The meeting was in a conference room Margaret had cleaned 100 times but never entered as anything but invisible help. Richard's father, Thomas Ashford Sr., was 81, white-haired, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Next to him sat the board chair and 2 other executives. Richard wasn't there. "Ms. Chen," Thomas Sr. began, "my son made a fool of himself Thursday night. I've heard multiple accounts of what happened, and while I'm disappointed in Richard's behavior, I'm more interested in the opportunity it revealed." He leaned forward. "Sarah tells me you're an international grandmaster. That's an extraordinary achievement. She also tells me you've been cleaning our offices for 3 years, and despite working here nightly, almost no one knew your name until now." Margaret felt her cheeks warm. "I'm good at my job, Mr. Ashford." "I'm sure you are. But you're capable of much more." He slid a folder across the table. "We'd like to create a position for you, Director of Community Engagement and Strategic Thinking Programs. You'd oversee our chess in schools partnership, develop critical thinking workshops for at-risk youth, and potentially create a mentorship program pairing our executives with young people from underserved communities. The salary would be..." He named a figure that made Margaret's breath catch. She stared at the folder, afraid to touch it, afraid this was a dream she'd wake from. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you do this?" Thomas Sr.'s expression softened. "Because my father started this company with nothing. He immigrated here with $50 and a suitcase. He understood what it meant to be dismissed, overlooked, treated as less than human because of where you came from." He paused. "I've let this company forget that. I've let people like my son believe success means being born into the right circumstances. You reminded us that brilliance, dignity, and worth have nothing to do with job titles or bank accounts. That's a lesson we need teaching regularly." Margaret felt tears slip down her cheeks. She thought of her father, who'd taught her chess in a park in Guangzhou. She thought of her late husband, who'd encouraged her dreams even when poverty made them impossible. She thought of her children, who'd grown up watching their mother work 3 jobs without complaint. "I accept," she whispered. 3 months later, Margaret stood in the Sterling Industries community room, teaching chess to 15 inner-city children. Sarah Kim had helped her design a program that went beyond just the game. It taught strategic thinking, patience, the understanding that your circumstances didn't define your potential. The kids called her Grandmaster Chen, and their eyes lit up when she shared stories from tournaments decades ago. Richard eventually apologized, face to face, with what seemed like genuine remorse. He'd enrolled in humility, you might say. His father had made his continued employment conditional on working with Margaret's programs, volunteering at the chess club, learning to see people rather than positions. It was a start. Margaret never forgot what it felt like to be invisible. That memory informed everything she built, programs that saw potential in overlooked places, that insisted everyone deserved to be truly seen. On Thursdays, the chess club still met. But now Margaret sat at the table as herself, teaching the game she loved to people who finally understood that wisdom and worth come in all forms, often wrapped in the most unexpected packages. If this story moved you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments about a time someone underestimated you, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Thank you for joining Margaret's journey. Until next time.